All right. Welcome to another narration of mine. Settle in for a moment. This is where the voices I carry meet the version of the truth most people avoid, and where the things we uncover tend to stay with us long after the story ends. Only the brave souls and the fearless ones stay until the end. Someone has been watching my family for a long time. Long enough that I stopped questioning it. Long enough that it became normal. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood, one of those places where everyone has the same kind of lawn, the same porch lights, the same routines. Nothing bad ever happened here. That's what made it easier to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. The first time I noticed him, I was a kid. I didn't know it was the same person back then. I just remember standing in the kitchen while my mom washed dishes, looking out the window at the side yard. There was a man standing near the tree line. He wasn't on our property exactly, just close enough to be there without being there. He wasn't moving. He wasn't hiding either. He just stood there, facing the house. I told my mom. She looked, sighed, and said it was probably someone walking their dog or cutting through yards. When I looked back, he was gone. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Over the years, little things kept happening. Doors we were sure we locked would be unlocked in the morning. Our trash cans would be moved closer to the house. Once, my dad found muddy footprints in the garage, leading nowhere, like whoever made them vanished halfway through. Whenever we talked about it as a family, we laughed it off. Probably kids, my dad would say. Probably animals. But animals don't knock. The knocking started when I was in high school, late at night, always slow, always 3 times. By the time someone reached the door, there was never anyone there. No footsteps, no car, nothing on the street. I started sleeping with my door locked after I woke up one night and felt like someone had been standing just outside it. I remember lying there, staring at the crack under the door, waiting to see light move. It didn't. But in the morning, there were faint marks on the handle, like someone had tried to turn it very slowly. Years passed. I moved out, then moved back in when money got tight. I told myself it would be different as an adult, that fear like that belonged to childhood. I was wrong. Last night changed everything. I woke up because I felt watched, not heard, not touched, just watched. My room was dark, but I could see the shape of my door. It was open. I always close it. Always. There was a figure standing just inside my room. He didn't rush me. He didn't speak. He stood there like he had all the time in the world, like this was something he'd done before. I grabbed the only thing within reach and stood up screaming. I didn't think. I just moved. He turned and ran, fast, like he already knew the way out. I chased him down the hall. My parents' door was closed. The house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. He disappeared before I could catch him. The police came. They looked around. They asked questions. They told us there was no sign of forced entry. They left. I didn't sleep after that, because while everyone else was focused on the house, I noticed something no one else did. The basement door was open. I know this sounds dramatic. I know it sounds like I'm overreacting. But when I stood at the top of those stairs and looked down into the dark, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The light was on, and I hadn't turned it on. This isn't even the worst part. This is just where it starts. After that night, everything in the house felt off, like the walls were breathing, like the air was thicker. Every shadow looked like him. Every creak sounded like a step. My parents kept brushing it off. My mom said I probably imagined the door being open. My dad said maybe I just left the basement light on and forgot. But I knew I didn't. I'd never even been down there in weeks. We barely used the basement anymore. The water heater leaked once, and ever since then, it just smelled like mold and rot. It was cold and empty, except for some old furniture and storage bins full of stuff we never unpacked when we moved back in. Still, the next day, when nobody was home, I went down there alone. I had to. At the top of the stairs, I froze. There was something sitting on the fourth step down. It was small, pale, looked like a crumpled piece of paper at first. But when I leaned closer, my whole body tensed up. It was a Polaroid, not a normal one either. It was old, yellowed, faded on the edges, and what was on it made my stomach turn. It was a picture of me, sleeping. Not just that, but recent. I was wearing the same shirt I had on 2 nights ago. My hair was the same length, and the angle. Whoever took it had to be standing in my room, maybe even right beside the bed. The picture wasn't blurry. It wasn't rushed. It was perfect, framed like it was taken by someone who had all the time in the world to get it right. I dropped it and ran up the stairs so fast I nearly tripped over myself. I didn't even close the basement door behind me. I just bolted out of the house, called the cops, and stood in the yard, shaking. When the police came again, they looked around like they were sick of being called. One of the officers took the photo, looked it over, and asked if I had a boyfriend or an ex who might have done it as a joke. I almost laughed. But something weird happened while they were in the basement. The officer who went down first came back up and asked me if I had been moving stuff around recently. I told him no, that no one had been down there in weeks. He didn't say much after that, just gave me a weird look. I went down again after they left, this time with a bat in my hand and my phone camera on. Everything had been moved. The boxes weren't stacked the same way. My dad's old recliner had been turned to face the stairs. And on the concrete wall, just behind where the recliner was now placed, someone had scratched something into the wall with what looked like a nail or a key. "Stay still." That's all it said. Nothing else. No name, no threats. Just those two words. Deep enough to leave white marks in the concrete. I didn't tell my parents right away. My mom was already having trouble sleeping, and my dad was doing that thing where he pretends it's not happening, because if he admits it's real, he has to do something about it. But I knew that message wasn't random. It was for me. That night, I locked my bedroom door and pushed a chair against it. I didn't sleep. I just sat up with my light on, waiting to hear something. Around 3:30 a.m., I heard footsteps again. Not in the hall, in the walls. Behind my closet, there's a panel that leads into a crawl space that runs along the back of the house. My dad said it was for access to wires and insulation. I hadn't opened it since I was a kid. The sound came from behind that panel. Slow, dragging movements, like someone army crawling through fiberglass. Then a loud thud, like a fist hitting the inside of the wall. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The panel wasn't flush with the wall anymore. It was pushed out slightly, just enough to see the darkness behind it. I should have left it alone. I should have waited for morning. But I was so tired of being scared that I snapped. I yanked the panel open, shining my light into the crawl space. It was empty, sort of. There was no person. But there was something else. A pile of old food wrappers, a torn piece of my bedsheet, one of my socks, and worst of all, a small, cheap notebook. I took it out. Every page was filled with the same thing, over and over, in different-sized handwriting, like someone wrote it every night, obsessively. She doesn't know I'm here. Page after page. She doesn't know I'm here. Some pages had it written hundreds of times. Some looked like they were written in a hurry. Others were calm, perfectly spaced. The last page had something different. Soon she will. That was 2 nights ago. But what happened last night? That's when everything changed. That's when I realized he wasn't just watching me anymore. That's when I woke up in the basement with a pounding head, blood dried behind my ear, and my hands tied with an extension cord. I came to slowly, not like in movies where you snap awake all at once. It was more like crawling back into my body, piece by piece. The first thing I noticed was the cold, concrete cold. It seeped through my clothes and into my bones. My second thought was that my head felt wrong, heavy, buzzing, like it had been rattled and never put back together right. When I tried to move, I couldn't. My wrists were pulled tight behind me. Something rough bit into my skin every time I shifted. My ankles were bound too, drawn in close enough that my legs were starting to cramp. Whoever tied me knew what they were doing. Not tight enough to cut off circulation, just tight enough to make sure I stayed put. The basement light was on. Same dull yellow glow. Same humming sound. But the room looked different now. The recliner was closer, right in front of me, facing me. someone had been sitting in it. I could tell, because the cushion was still sunken in, like it hadn't had time to fully rise back up yet. I called out for my parents. My voice cracked. It sounded small down there. The sound didn't travel far. It just died in the corners of the room. That's when I smelled him. I don't know how else to explain it. It wasn't sweat exactly. It was old. Like damp clothes left too long in a closed space, mixed with something sour, something human. I tried to pull against the cords again, panic starting to climb up my throat. And that's when I heard movement behind me. Slow footsteps. Not rushed. Not sneaky. Just calm. He stepped into my view, right in front of me, and crouched down so we were eye level. I won't describe his face in detail. I don't want to. I don't think I could, even if I tried. My brain doesn't like going there. I'll just say he looked ordinary enough that if I passed him on the street, I wouldn't remember him 5 minutes later. That made it worse. He smiled like we were old friends, like this was something we shared. He said my name, not loud, not threatening, just said it like it belonged to him. I asked him what he wanted. I hated how weak my voice sounded. I hated that I could hear myself shaking. He tilted his head, like he was thinking about how to answer. I wanted to see if you'd recognize me, he said. I told him I didn't, that I'd never seen him before in my life. He smiled wider. That's not true, he said. You just don't remember the first time. He stood up and walked around me slowly. I could feel him behind me, close enough that my skin crawled. He talked the whole time, casual, like he was giving a tour. He told me about things I never remembered telling anyone. Stuff from when I was a kid, where I used to hide when I was scared. What window I liked to sit by. How my parents argued late at night when they thought I was asleep. He knew things that only someone inside the house could know. At one point, he stopped right behind me and leaned down close to my ear. You always sleep so deeply, he said. That's been my favorite thing about you. I felt sick. I asked him how long he'd been coming here. He didn't answer right away. He walked back to the recliner and sat down again, crossing his legs like he was settling in. Longer than you think, he said. Shorter than it feels. He stood up again and went to the stairs. Halfway up, he stopped and turned back to me. Oh, he said, like he almost forgot. You might want to be quieter next time. Then he turned off the light. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark. My hands went numb. My thoughts went everywhere at once. I kept expecting him to come back down, but he didn't. Eventually, I heard my mom's voice upstairs. Then my dad's. I screamed until my throat burned. They found me an hour later. My mom cried. My dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 minutes. The police came again, more serious this time. But here's the part that keeps me awake now. They searched the house, top to bottom, inside and out. They didn't find him. They didn't find any sign of forced entry. And when one of the officers asked how he got out of the basement, I realized something I hadn't before. There's no lock on the basement door from the inside, which means he didn't leave. That night, after everyone finally went to sleep, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. You were never meant to chase me. After that night in the basement, nothing in the house felt real anymore. I didn't feel like I lived there. I felt like I was squatting in something else's territory, something that had been there long before we ever moved in. And I started to notice things I'd never noticed before. Not new things, old ones. Details that had been right in front of me for years, but I'd never thought to question them. Like how the hallway outside my room was always a little colder than the rest of the house. Or how the light bulb in the laundry room never lasted more than a week, no matter how many times we replaced it. Or how sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd hear the sound of the kitchen faucet turning on, running for a few seconds, and shutting off again. But the worst one? The crawl space panel in my closet. It never quite fit the same again. I stuffed a chair in front of it, nailed a board across the top and bottom, taped it too. It didn't matter. Every morning I'd check it, and the tape would be peeled off like someone was mocking me. Never all the way, just one corner, curled up like a smile. I stopped sleeping. I started keeping a hammer next to my bed, and every night before I turned off the lights, I'd check every window, every door, and every closet, sometimes twice. My parents thought I was spiraling. My dad sat me down and told me I needed to move on, whatever that meant. But I knew he was still in the house. It was the smell that gave it away. Every few days, this sour, wet stink would fill the hallway, almost like wet dog fur mixed with something metallic. It would come and go. My mom thought it was mildew. She bought candles and kept spraying the walls with cleaner. But the smell wasn't in the walls. It moved. It lived. One night, I left my room around 2 a.m. to go to the bathroom. I'd been holding it for hours because I was too scared to move. The house was dead quiet, like it had been vacuum sealed. I walked out into the hallway, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't human either. It was slow, with little hitching gasps, like someone was trying not to make noise, but couldn't help it. And it wasn't coming from my parents' room or the bathroom. It was coming from inside the hallway wall. I froze. My whole body locked up. I didn't even breathe. I just stood there and listened. The breathing got closer, not fast, crawling, inch by inch. I could hear nails dragging across insulation, the soft creaking of wood under weight. The sound was right at head level. I backed into the bathroom, locked the door, and waited. After a few minutes, the breathing stopped. But I didn't leave the bathroom until the sun came up. That same morning, I decided I was done waiting for answers. I wanted to know how long this had been going on. I started digging through our old storage boxes, the ones we'd shoved into the attic crawl space and never touched again. Stuff from before we moved into this house. That's when I found the old family camera, the digital one we used when I was a kid. It still had an SD card in it. Most of the photos were normal. Birthday parties, vacations, random blurry selfies from when I was like 9. But then I got to the last folder. It was called 1. Inside were photos we never took, pictures of our house, from the inside, at night. There was one of our living room, taken from behind the couch, one of our kitchen, from inside the pantry, one of my parents sleeping in their bed, and one of me. I was maybe 13, wearing a Halloween costume. It was a picture taken from behind me, down the street, as I walked with my friends. But it wasn't the picture that made me sick. It was the timestamp. October 31st, 11:08 p.m. I checked my mom's Facebook. She had posted photos from that same night. One of them showed me and my friends standing in the yard just before we left to trick or treat. And in the background, across the street, standing under the neighbor's porch light, there was a figure, too tall to be any of the kids, wearing dark clothes, standing completely still. I zoomed in. The face was blurry, like the camera couldn't focus on it. But the posture, the way the shoulders were slumped forward, the angle of the head, it was him. He'd been watching me since I was a kid. When I showed the pictures to my parents, my dad went pale. My mom started crying. She said something like, "Not again," under her breath. That's when I knew. They were hiding something. When I asked them, they denied it at first. But eventually, late that night, my mom came to my room. Her eyes were red. She looked like she'd aged 20 years in one day. She sat on the edge of my bed and said something I'll never forget. "We used to get letters," she whispered, "before you were born, before we even lived in this house." I asked what kind of letters. "Descriptions," she said, "of me, of your dad, of what we did that day, what we wore, where we went." But the scariest part was they never said our names. Just her, or the one in the blue dress, like we were characters in a story. She said they moved houses 3 times, trying to escape it, but it always found them. I asked her why she never told me. She looked at the floor and said, "Because we thought maybe if we acted like it wasn't real, it wouldn't be." It was real. The next night, the power went out around 1:45 a.m. The house went dead silent. No wind, no humming, nothing. That's when I heard the basement door open. When the basement door opened, I didn't think. That's the scariest part. I didn't freeze. I didn't hide. I moved. Something in me was tired of being hunted in my own house. Tired of sleeping with lights on. Tired of checking walls like they were alive. I grabbed the hammer from beside my bed and stepped into the hallway. The power was still out. The only light came from my phone screen. The house felt hollow. like it had been emptied out and left behind. The basement stairs were darker than I remembered, not just unlit, thick, like the darkness had weight to it. I stood at the top for a long time, listening. Nothing. No breathing. No footsteps. No movement at all. I went down slowly, one step at a time, keeping my back to the wall. Halfway down, my phone buzzed. Another message. Same unknown number. You finally stopped pretending. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw something new. A door. I know that sounds impossible. I've lived in this house most of my life. There has never been another door down there. Just the furnace, the old shelves, and the concrete wall. But there it was. A narrow wooden door, half rotted, set into the far wall like it had always belonged there. It was already open. Inside was a space I didn't recognize. Low ceiling, dirt floor. The smell was overwhelming. Old air, old life. And on the wall, nailed in crooked rows, were photos. Hundreds of them, not just of me, of my parents, of our old houses, of places we'd lived years ago. Photos taken from across streets, from inside rooms, from angles that made my skin crawl. But mixed in with them were older photos, black and white ones, families I didn't know, houses that looked like ours, but wrong, too similar. I realized then what my parents never said out loud. It wasn't just one person. This wasn't a stalker. It was a place, a thing tied to the house, or maybe to the land, something that learned people, watched them, passed them on. That's when he spoke again, but not from behind me, from everywhere. You're the first one who followed. The lights came back on. The room was empty. No man, no footsteps, just the photos. The police came one last time after we called them. They tore the basement apart. They found nothing behind the wall. No door, no room. Just concrete. We moved out a week later. Didn't sell the house. Just left. I live somewhere else now. New city. New locks. New walls. But sometimes, late at night, I'll get a message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. You still sleep deeply. And that's how I know. It didn't stay behind. It never does. I don't know why it follows families like mine. I don't know how many there have been before us. I just know one thing. If you ever feel like your house knows you too well, don't ignore it. And don't ever follow it downstairs.